There are moments in life we think are long buried, yet one day they return and change everything we thought we knew. The story you're about to hear, The Day XXX Changed My Love Story Forever, follows Amelia Carter, a woman caught between stability and a fire she thought was lost to the past. Can forbidden memories awaken her heart, or will they burn everything down? Step with me into this world of emotions, secrets, and impossible choices. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters. Your support means the world, and it inspires me to bring you even more powerful and unforgettable stories. Rain was sliding down the tall windows of the Carter apartment like endless rivers of glass, and I sat there in the fading light, my reflection a fractured ghost caught between the storm outside and the storm inside. London evenings had a way of making the city feel like an endless maze of blurred lights and hushed secrets, and I could not escape the feeling that something was waiting for me in the shadows. My phone lay silent on the coffee table until it trembled with a single vibration that made me flinch. I lifted it, expecting another brief message from Ethan reminding me he would be late, again, another dinner postponed, another evening stretched into solitude. But it wasn't Ethan. It was a number I had not seen in years, and on the screen glowed only 3 letters, stark and impossible, XXX. I froze, breath caught at the back of my throat. Those letters were not random. They carried the weight of a time I had buried under years of careful routine, a symbol of passion and danger that I had once dared to call my own. My fingers trembled as I touched the glass, tracing the edges of the letters as though they could burn me. For a moment the room felt smaller, the ticking clock louder, my pulse racing faster than the storm outside. Ethan was not here to see the way my hands shook, the way color drained from my face. He rarely was these days. His world was filled with meetings, clients, and late-night negotiations with Marcus Hale, his ever-faithful colleague, while mine was filled with silence, unspoken questions, and a marriage that looked perfect from the outside but felt like an empty frame around a forgotten painting. I whispered the letters aloud. XXX. The sound of it felt both forbidden and intimate, as though the walls might lean closer to listen. I knew exactly who it was, even if the number had changed. Liam Hayes. The one who had once known me more than anyone else, more than Ethan ever had, perhaps more than I had known myself. Liam, with his reckless smile and his voice that had turned even the quietest night into a conspiracy. Liam, who had been my secret, my sin, my sanctuary, all woven into one. And XXX had been ours, a code, a vow, a shadow word that meant everything we could not say out loud. I closed my eyes, memories pressing against me. The scent of library dust and late-night rain, the warmth of his hand brushing mine when no one was looking, the silent promises carried in glances across crowded rooms. And then the decision to end it, to bury it deep because I had chosen stability, security, Ethan. I had chosen the life that looked right, sounded right, even if it did not feel right. Now, years later, the past had clawed its way back into my present, 3 letters at a time. The sound of a key turning broke the spell, and I hurried to set the phone face down on the table. Ethan walked in, tall and composed in his gray suit, the kind of man who belonged in boardrooms more than living rooms. He gave me a tired smile, the kind that seemed rehearsed. "Amelia, you're still up. I thought you might have gone to bed." His voice was warm but distant, like sunlight through a pane of frosted glass. He hung his coat carefully, straightened his tie, every movement precise. I watched him and felt the gulf between us, not cruel but cold. "I couldn't sleep," I said softly, hoping he wouldn't hear the tremor in my voice. He nodded without asking why, without noticing. Ethan loved me, I knew that, but his love was a quiet thing, unspoken, buried under layers of responsibility and restraint. He never shouted, never raged, but he also never reached me. He sat beside me for a moment, his hand brushing mine with a fleeting touch, then he reached for his briefcase. papers mattered more than pulses. I studied his profile and wondered if he would ever ask about the secrets I kept in my silence. But Ethan Carter did not ask questions he was not ready to hear the answers to. Later, when he had gone to bed, I stared at the phone again, the message still glowing. Olivia Bennet's voice echoed in my mind, her advice from countless coffee conversations. You can't spend your whole life pretending you're not starving when your soul is screaming for more. Olivia was free, unanchored, and often reckless, but her words pierced me because they held the truth I feared. My thumb hovered over the screen. Should I reply? Should I lock it away and forget? The storm outside thundered, and my heart answered before my mind could stop it. I typed only one word, why? The reply came instantly, as though he had been waiting in the dark for me to open the door. Because you once told me XXX was forever. My breath caught. Forever. A word I had not dared to touch in years, because forever had become a chain around my neck instead of wings. Suddenly, I felt the apartment suffocate me, its polished surfaces and silent walls pressing against me like accusations. I needed air. I slipped into a coat, careful not to wake Ethan, and stepped out into the London night. The rain had calmed to a mist, the streets glistening like mirrors fractured by street lamps. My steps were aimless at first, but the city seemed to know where I was going before I did. And then, at the corner near the old cafe I had once loved, I saw him. Liam Hayes stood beneath the awning, the light casting half his face in shadow. He looked older, sharper, but the same storm lived in his eyes. His gaze locked on me, and the years fell away like brittle paper. For a moment we just stood there, silence louder than the traffic, our histories colliding in the space between breaths. Then he smiled, not the reckless grin of youth, but something deeper, heavier, as though he too carried the weight of the word between us. Do you still remember the night of XXX? He asked, voice low, intimate, a whisper that belonged not to the street but to the darkness we once shared. My heart slammed against my ribs. Yes, I remembered. How could I not? But the words tangled in my throat, and all I could do was meet his eyes, knowing that whatever wall I had built around my life was already cracking. The night stretched before us, full of questions, full of dangers, full of desires I had promised myself I would never awaken again. And yet, as I stood there drenched in rain and memory, I knew with terrifying certainty that this was only the beginning. The moment Liam spoke those words, the city seemed to fall away. The sounds of taxis rushing through wet streets, the faint murmur of late-night conversations spilling out of bars, the distant hum of London life, all of it blurred into silence. Only his voice remained, low and insistent, wrapping around me like a memory I had tried so hard to bury. The night of XXX. Even the air between us felt charged, as though it carried echoes of the past. I should have walked away. I should have told him that chapter of my life was closed, locked, and buried under vows I had spoken with trembling lips at the altar. But instead, I stood frozen, my heart thundering against my ribs as my eyes searched his face. Time had etched itself into his features, but he wore it well. The boy I had once loved in secret had grown into a man who carried shadows like an armor, his gaze sharp but softened when it landed on me. You shouldn't have reached out, I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. The words felt like a flimsy curtain drawn against a storm. You know what this could do. Liam's lips curved into that familiar half-smile, dangerous and tender all at once. Amelia, you always talk about consequences first. You did back then too. But you also knew some fires are worth burning for. He tilted his head, his eyes catching the glow of the street lamp. Tell me you haven't thought about it. About us. About XXX. I inhaled sharply, the 3 letters heavy in the damp night air. Memories surged like waves, threatening to pull me under. I remembered the trembling of my hands as I wrote them in the corner of his notebook one evening at university, our secret code for everything we couldn't admit. Desire, defiance, forever. All compressed into those 3 forbidden letters. He hadn't forgotten. Neither had I. I made my choice, I said at last, though my voice cracked. I chose Ethan. I chose stability. That was years ago. His smile faded, replaced by something darker, more vulnerable. And has stability given you happiness? Or just silence? He stepped closer, his presence intoxicating, pulling at me with the gravity of everything I had denied myself. I should have retreated, but I didn't. The rain dripped from the edge of the awning, rhythmically punctuating the silence between us. "Stop," I murmured, though my body betrayed me by leaning infinitesimally closer. "You don't understand. Things aren't that simple." "Then explain them to me," he said. His eyes searched mine with an intensity that made my knees weaken. "Tell me why your eyes look lonelier now than they ever did back then." A car horn broke the moment, startling me back into the present. I shook my head, pulling my coat tighter around me. "I can't do this," I said quickly, my voice more breath than sound. "I can't stand here with you and pretend this doesn't rip me apart." Without waiting for his reply, I turned and walked away, the sound of my footsteps mingling with the rain. My heart ached with every step, torn between running back and running further away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I feared I'd never escape. By the time I reached the apartment, the city lights seemed cruel, exposing me like a secret scrawled across glass. Inside, the flat was quiet. Ethan had left a note on the dining table in his neat handwriting, "Early meeting tomorrow. Don't wait up." It was the kind of note he had left 100 times, impersonal yet oddly considerate. I stared at the words until they blurred. He had no idea what storm was gathering inside me, no idea of the past that had just knocked on my door. Or maybe he did and chose not to see. That was Ethan. Ever polite, ever restrained, a man who loved me with boundaries as rigid as glass walls. I curled up on the sofa, phone still heavy in my palm. No new messages from Liam, but the weight of the conversation lingered like smoke in my lungs. I thought of calling Olivia, confessing everything, but I knew what she would say: "Amelia, you're alive, but you're not living. Maybe it's time you asked yourself what you really want." Her voice echoed in my mind, and for the first time I let myself wonder what I did want. Safety or fire? Silence or truth? Ethan or Liam? The questions gnawed at me until exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. The next morning the world resumed its mask of normalcy. Ethan was already gone when I woke, his side of the bed untouched by warmth. I brewed coffee, its bitter scent filling the kitchen, but the taste turned to ash on my tongue. Work emails blinked on my laptop, errands piled on my to-do list, but none of it mattered. All I could think about was the way Liam's voice had lingered in the night air, asking me if stability had given me happiness. The cruel truth was that I couldn't answer. Later that afternoon, I met Olivia at our usual cafe. She breezed in wearing her leather jacket, hair tousled, eyes sparkling with the kind of freedom I envied. Sliding into the seat opposite me, she tilted her head. "You look like you've been haunted," she said bluntly. "What happened?" I hesitated, fingers tightening around my cup. "I saw him," I admitted at last. Her eyes widened. "Liam?" she asked, leaning in. I nodded. She let out a low whistle. Well, I always knew that ghost would come knocking eventually. What did he want?" "To remind me of the past," I said, voice low. "To remind me of XXX." Her lips parted in surprise. "He used the code." When I nodded again, she shook her head. "That's dangerous, Amelia. You know it. That word doesn't just belong to the past. It belongs to the part of you that you've kept locked away. And now he's trying to open it." I stared down at my coffee, steam curling upward like a veil. "And what if I want it opened?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Olivia's expression softened, her hand reaching across to squeeze mine. "Then you need to be honest with yourself," she said gently. "But remember, honesty has consequences. For you, for Ethan, for Liam. And you can't live in two worlds forever." Her words lingered long after we parted. That evening, Ethan returned home earlier than usual. He poured himself a drink, his movements deliberate, his silence heavy. I watched him from across the room, studying the set of his jaw, the faint crease in his brow. "You've been quiet lately," he said suddenly, surprising me. "More than usual. Is something wrong?" For a fleeting second, I almost told him everything. About the message, about Liam, about the way my heart was tearing itself apart. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw the man who had built his life around order and control. I couldn't shatter his world with the chaos of mine. So I forced a smile and shook my head. "Just tired," I said softly. He accepted the answer, nodding, though his gaze lingered a moment longer than usual. As he turned back to his drink, I realized something. The silence between us wasn't just distance. It was survival. We both lived within it because the alternative, truth, might destroy everything. Later that night, alone in the dark, my phone buzzed again. One message. "Meet me. Tomorrow. You know where." No signature. No explanation. But I knew exactly who it was and exactly where he meant. My pulse quickened, torn between dread and desire. The past was no longer waiting quietly at the edges of my life. It was here, demanding to be answered. I lay awake long after Ethan drifted into his steady, even breathing beside me. The shadows stretched long across the ceiling, and in their shapes I saw the outlines of choices I wasn't ready to make. Yet one truth pressed harder than all the rest. Tomorrow, I would see Liam again. And nothing, no silence, no vows, no fear, could stop what was already set in motion. The night before I was meant to meet Liam, sleep abandoned me entirely. I lay awake beside Ethan, my eyes tracing the shadows that stretched across the ceiling, my body still but my mind spiraling into a storm. The message burned in my chest like a secret brand. "Meet me. Tomorrow. You know where." Every second stretched long, every heartbeat heavy with a question I could not answer. Would I go? And if I did, what would become of the life I had so carefully built around silence and stability? Morning came grey and reluctant, the kind of London day where the sky seemed permanently stitched with clouds. Ethan left early, a quiet goodbye pressed to my temple, his hand lingering on my shoulder for just a moment too long. I almost reached for him then, almost broke the silence that lived between us. But the words stuck, unspoken, buried under years of restraint. By noon, I found myself walking without deciding, my steps guided by something deeper than will. The cafe where Liam had first kissed me years ago, tucked away down a narrow street near the Thames, stood unchanged, as though time had skipped it. Its windows fogged from the inside, its wooden tables still uneven, its scent of strong coffee and something sweet and burnt lingering in the air. And there he was, waiting at our old table, as if no time had passed. When our eyes met, the years between us collapsed. He smiled, not the careless grin of youth, but something tempered, laced with longing and regret. I sat opposite him, my hands trembling as I folded them in my lap. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "Neither did I admitted. The honesty in my own voice startled me. For a while we said nothing, the weight of memory pressing between us. Then Liam leaned forward, his gaze piercing mine. "Amelia, do you remember what XXX meant to us?" The letters sent a shiver through me. How could I forget? I whispered. It was everything we couldn't say out loud. It was a promise, a rebellion, a dream we thought we'd never have to let go. "And maybe it still can be," he said, his hand brushing mine across the table. His touch was fire and ache, every nerve in my body responding. "We don't have to keep living in cages we built for ourselves." I pulled my hand back, heart hammering. "It's not that simple, Liam. I have Ethan. I have a life. And as hollow as it feels sometimes, it's still real. I can't just burn it down." He studied me with a mixture of frustration and tenderness. "Do you love him?" The question sliced through me. My mouth opened, but no words came. Did I love Ethan? I cared for him, respected him, shared a home and a name with him. But love, the wild, consuming kind that had once made me write XXX in the corner of Liam's notebook, had long ago withered into quiet companionship. Liam's eyes softened as he read the truth in my silence. "You deserve more, Amelia," he said. "You deserve fire, not ashes." Tears pricked my eyes, but I shook my head. "And what if the fire destroys me?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn scrap of paper, folded so many times it threatened to fall apart. He slid it across the table. "I kept this," he said. My breath caught as I unfolded it. There, in my handwriting from all those years ago, were the 3 letters, XXX. The ink faded, but the meaning still burned. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, Liam continued, his voice raw. But I know one thing. That night, when you wrote those letters, you promised me your truth. And I've spent every year since searching for mine. Maybe our truths still belong together. The cafe felt too small to contain the enormity of his words. I stood abruptly, needing air, needing distance. He followed me outside into the grey drizzle, the city buzzing around us. My chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. I can't, I said again, though it sounded less like refusal and more like surrender. You can, he whispered, stepping closer. But only if you choose yourself. Only if you choose to live, not just survive. For a long moment, I let the rain wash over us, my body torn between past and present, between the fire of Liam's gaze and the steady, aching silence of Ethan's touch. And then, with trembling certainty, I realized the choice was not between them. It was between the woman I had become and the woman I still longed to be. That night, I returned home to Ethan, soaked from the rain and heavy with truth. He looked up from the couch as I entered, concern flickering across his face. Amelia? What happened? I stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the floor, and finally let the silence shatter. I saw him, I said quietly. Liam. He's back. And he reminded me of everything I've buried. Ethan's face tightened, pain flashing in his eyes. For once, he didn't mask it behind control. I always knew there was someone, he admitted, his voice low. Even before we married, I could feel it, the part of you that wasn't mine. Tears blurred my vision. I tried, Ethan. I tried to be the wife you needed, the woman who could live inside this safe, quiet world. But I can't. Not anymore. I need honesty. I need to stop hiding from myself. Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then Ethan set down his glass and crossed the room, standing before me. His eyes, usually guarded, now brimmed with vulnerability. Do you love him? He asked, echoing Liam's question. I don't know, I confessed. But I know I can't keep living like this. Neither of us deserves it. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with a weary sigh, he placed his hands gently on my shoulders. Maybe love isn't about cages or fire. Maybe it's about knowing when to let go. If Liam is your truth, then go. Find it. Just promise me one thing, that you won't lose yourself again. His grace broke me open. I wept into his chest, not from regret but from gratitude, for the man who, in his own quiet way, loved me enough to release me. And when I finally honored that promise, my life changed forever. I don't pretend the path ahead will be easy. Love rarely is. But I walk it now with open eyes, carrying both the ache of the past and the fire of the future. And in the quiet moments when doubt creeps in, I remember the lesson that cost me so much to learn. Silence may keep us safe, but only truth can set us free. That was the day XXX changed my love story forever. Not by rekindling an old flame, not by destroying the life I once had, but by teaching me the most valuable truth of all, that love, in its purest form, begins with the courage to choose yourself.